For decades, America has tried to combat the harms of drug use primarily through banning drugs and incarcerating people who use them. But this has caused a violent underground market for drugs, increasing crime in our communities. It's caused contaminated substances, increasing overdose deaths, and it's caused incarceration to skyrocket, destabilizing families. What we're doing isn't working. Crime, death, and broken families are the collateral damage of using the criminal justice system to address the public health issue of drugs. If you're looking for a better path forward, you're in the right place. What if we changed our drug policies to prioritize life, health, harm reduction, and thriving? And what if it benefited all of us? Our criminal justice approach to drugs had a beginning, and it can have an end. Join us on the journey to end it for good. I'm Christina Dent, your host, and if you're new here, End It for Good is a nonprofit started in 2019, based in Mississippi, that invites people to support approaches to drugs that prioritize life and the opportunity to thrive. This podcast is one of the ways we do that. You can head over to episode 34 to hear my story as a conservative Christian foster mom, changing my own mind on the best path forward with drugs, and then come on back and dive in deeper. I didn't change my mind overnight, and most other people don't either. We all need time to learn, think, ask questions, and explore. Whatever your perspective is, I'm glad you're here. Let's journey together. Welcome back to the End It for Good podcast. I'm Christina Dent, your host. Really excited to be with you again, along with my friend Meghann Perry, who is going to be joining us today to share her story as well as her professional expertise on an issue that is near and dear to my heart, prenatal substance use and perinatal substance use, and also just her own personal experience and experience working in this field of substance use disorder and recovery and treatment and all of the things. But really specifically today, we're going to be diving into moms and babies and how can we help this relationship in such a important and vulnerable phase of this new life starting. So Meghann, welcome to the End It for Good podcast.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So now I'm going to do the awkward thing and tell you a little bit about Meghann's bio, which is always awkward for people to hear people talk about themselves. But she is an award-winning storyteller, speaker, educator, recovery coach professional. She designs innovative learning experiences and therapeutic programs for the behavioral health field. And all of those are grounded in peer support and creative expression. So she does a lot related to creativity and theater and all kinds of different things. She's a global speaker and presenter. She passionately supports people of all ages in prevention, harm reduction, and recovery. And she leads a team of facilitators at the Meghann Perry Group who are redefining education in the substance and mental health field. So we're going to dive in. Meghann, I know you're really passionate about this. That's why we wanted you to come on the podcast you've been on before, talking about storytelling and how to authentically but carefully share stories that are so near and dear to our hearts, such as things related to addiction and recovery. And wanted to have you back because of our interest as an organization in what's happening around substance use and pregnancy and that period that's so important and vulnerable after a child's birth and that bonding period, and how we can protect more women and children and during that phase, even when we have something really complex like substance use that is involved in that as well. So how did you get interested in this aspect? You've done a lot of education around this for other people. How did you get interested in this particular aspect of substance use disorder and recovery?
I mean, the first door that I went through was my own experience. I was a substance user from a pretty young age. I had mental health and substance use challenges from, age 15 on. And, I was married. I was struggling with heroin use and really polysubstance use, and became pregnant. And not long after I became pregnant, the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration, came to the door because 6 months before that, I had sold $40 worth of heroin to what was then my heroin dealer. And so I had a felony indictment for trafficking heroin. And I was 5 months pregnant when I was 6 weeks pregnant when they first came to the door, and 5 months pregnant when I ended up incarcerated. I was utilizing methadone to support a reduction or elimination of use of heroin. And by the time, not long after I found out I was pregnant, I had stopped using heroin. But the system, was catching up with me. And so I was incarcerated for 3 weeks during my pregnancy. And, um, you know, basically, sort of once I was engaged in the criminal justice system right at the beginning of the pregnancy, that stayed with me for a very long time. And I was able to get out on a special type of bail contract before my daughter's birth so that I was able to have her in the hospital and stay with her. And because of the methadone, she was born dependent on an opioid. And so she went through neonatal opioid withdrawal syndrome and was at the NICU for a little bit and then in the hospital for just short of 2 months. When we took her home, we really weren't equipped to care for her. It was sort of this cliff edge drop off in services, and we'd gone from round the clock care to just myself and my husband, who at the time was undocumented. He's from another country, and the process to get residency was really expensive and really challenging, and we just didn't have the capacity to do that. So um, we were home struggling with caring for an infant that had high needs and dealing with the criminal justice system. And so I ended up doing a drug court program. It took me 18 months. I was incarcerated over and over during that. It was not a positive experience for me or for my daughter. And so we were separated a lot. And that time under surveillance and sort of under coercion and force and control was really traumatic, and it really didn't serve us well in the three of us trying to be healthy or be well or bond or have any kind of normalcy. So that, and of course there's so much more to that story, and there's a more complete version of it in Health Affairs, in the September issue of Health Affairs on opioids. But that those early years, that first 2 or 3 years from pregnancy through to the first couple of years after she was born and I was still in drug court, were really defined kind of the trajectory of all three of our lives ever since. And that was 25 years ago. And so that experience really, once I was able to do some of my own healing, and get some health and sort of work on some of that healing and that trauma of that experience and find a way to talk about it. I started talking about it publicly and doing advocacy work, and then moving into peer support and education. And so now this particular topic is one that I talk about a lot and work with a lot.
And when you say peer support, also, just if people aren't familiar, it's people with a lived experience that is similar to, in some ways, the person that you're trying to help, so that it's not just a professional who doesn't have any idea what the person they're trying to help is going through. Thank you so much for sharing that. I really appreciate that. That is so difficult, such a difficult story to live, but also when you tell a story like that, you're investing emotionally in recalling it. And so I appreciate you sharing that. And I think for a lot of people, my experience as a foster parent was so many people just there's no place in their mind, and there was no place in my own mind prior to really digging in and learning to understand, like, why would someone who's pregnant be using substances? Like, this doesn't make any sense unless they just don't care. So talk to us about that, because I love how you talk when we've talked together about people having really good reasons why they use substances. We don't think about that because we just think like drugs are bad and they take people over, as opposed to like, what is really going on here and what purpose is this substance serving for someone because they're using it for a reason. Talk about that.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, you named complexity right from the start, and that's really what I think is so important to hold when we think about perinatal substance use, because perinatal substance use is like terrifying if we just take it at surface value and we just think about, a body is carrying another human being, and um, and taking substances that is harming that human being. So of course, this is scary. It's concerning. We should be thinking and focusing on and worrying about it, and trying to minimize harm. Minimizing harm looks like a lot of different things and not always what we immediately think of. I think the first thing that we have to recognize about substance use during the perinatal period, and all substance use, is why people use them. There's really good reasons why people use substances, and that may sound really crazy to some folks, but most of us use substances. We just may not use the ones that are not legal, but we probably use legal substances or have during our lifetime. And we had good reasons to. They make us feel good, or they make us feel better, or they make us feel less bad, or they make us perform better, or they make us forget things that are really painful to think about or feel, or for risk taking, for curiosity, for experimentation, for peer and social interaction. There are so many reasons that we use substances, whether it be nicotine, caffeine, alcohol, prescription drugs, all of the illicit drugs, sugar. Like, I consider myself a substance user of caffeine and sugar today because they make me feel different and I like how they make me feel, and so I use them. When we look at when use becomes problematic, it's often because there are those underlying causes there, that I consider like really good reasons why people are using. For me, I had really significant mental health challenges. I had depression and anxiety. The anxiety was intolerable. The hopelessness from depression was so daunting and overwhelming. I had obsessive compulsive disorder behaviors. I was never diagnosed with it. And substances for me were a way to tolerate being in my own skin and body and brain and heart. I believe that had I not used substances during my adolescent and early adult years, I may have harmed myself or ended my life. And so that mechanism for me to deal with my mental health became problematic because the mental health was not abated. There was no relief from the mental health conditions, and therefore substance use became a really essential critical tool for me. And then once that was so problematic that I could see how severe the consequences were, it was next to impossible to just remove that without building up a lot of other things and a lot of other ways to ease that pain, figure out how to live with myself, address the mental health challenges. So when we look at pregnant people who use substances, and I also want to name that not all substance use is problematic. And so when we look at a person in the perinatal period who is using substances, we can't, and choosing to continue to use substances does not necessarily mean they have addiction or severe substance use disorder. They have a relationship with substances. So we can't separate the substance use from everything else that's going on in that person's life. And so when we're looking at understanding why people will continue to use substances when, the stakes are high, when other people are impacted, it's because it's um, sort of a mechanism, a relationship that's woven into many, many aspects of their lives. And so it is not as simple as just extracting that substance. Medication for opioid use disorder is a great example of that. The functionality, the things that heroin did for me, those things could be satisfied through methadone for me. Not all of them, but many of them. And so that's a much better approach than just saying, now you can't have heroin, you got to figure the rest out. That in some cases can be more dangerous than having the person continue to use a substance.
Right. And that I think that is so hard for society to grapple with. We just really want to have these very clear cut lines of, well, just don't do it, or you're pregnant, just stop. I love how you framed that the substance use is connected to a bunch of other things. You can't, if you just remove the substance use, you're left with all the other things.
Mm.
And that is, for most people, you can't just cut off the substance use, but and just all at one time in one day deal with all the other things. That's, it just doesn't make any sense. It's not possible for people. And so when we only have this kind of clear cut line, we miss the opportunity to acknowledge what's really happening, which is the substances are serving a function. Sometimes we talk about it like, you have a glass that's full. If the substance use is taking up a considerable portion of that glass in terms of the ability to kind of function in life, and you just remove it without putting in other things that can help fill all of those gaps and help make that possible, we just have an empty glass. Like a person can't function with not an empty glass. They got to get up. They've got to deal with the thoughts and the feelings and all the things that come during the day. Are they going to go to work, and are they going to be able to work, and are they going to be able to parent, and whatever all of those other things that are part of their life are. I think for people who are not living in active addiction, we often think of addiction as an add-on to the life that a person is living. And so we think, well, if you just stop the addiction, then you could just go to work and be a parent and go back to your house and cut your grass and all of that. But that's all of those things are there potentially because we're not struggling with the addiction. Like it's not like you can't just say, well, the addiction is kind of this separate thing. It's easy for maybe someone like myself to think of my life and then think, what if a substance use disorder was added on to my life? But my life would probably look very different if there was an active substance use disorder there, and the reasons why I was using, I would still be left with. And so it's just so much more complex. We just tend to flatten out other people's lives, and we think we'll just stop making a particular decision. Whereas we realize in our own lives, I mean, ask anybody about their family, and the first thing that comes out is, oh gosh, it's complicated. Well, my sister, da 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 da, my mom, la 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 la. Like, what if I told somebody about your family relationships? We'll just stop being like that. It's like, well, that's crazy. Oh man, it's so complicated. And all these people, well, everyone's life is that way. Everyone's life is complicated. I think part of the tragedy of the way we've approached substance use is that flattening out of people's experience, and that they have become, I don't ever use the word addict, but culturally we have this kind of terminology of addict, like that's all a person is. That's all that is in their life. When really, they are a person with a whole host of life experiences and thoughts and feelings and brain connections and all sorts of, just like everyone is. And you can't just say, well, take the substances out. Well, they're there for a reason. Why do you have the relationship you do with the parent you do? Well, you can't just say fix it. Like, that doesn't just fix it. It doesn't work. Life doesn't work that way. So the more that we can embrace the complexity, that the reason why a person is making a particular decision at a particular time on a particular day has been built on a lifetime of experiences and a lifetime of coping and ways of seeing the world and perspectives and pain and hurt and maybe healing and maybe not healing yet. And we got to give a lot more complexity to why people do the things they do. I'm in my own mind, and I don't even I am not even trying to figure someone else out. I'm just trying to figure myself out, and I still don't know why I do some of the things I do. I'm in therapy going, why do I do this to myself? Why did I, eat the cookies when I wasn't hungry and they didn't taste good? What is it that the food is doing for me, and here I am, I'm 42. I'm still trying to figure out why I do a bunch of the things that I do. To talk about, one of the things that has started happening in some states is that there has been a push for looking at the harm that can happen, does not necessarily happen, but can happen to a child if they are exposed to substances in utero, and saying we need to arrest women for prenatal substance use. That's happening where I live in Mississippi. Women are being charged with, it might be under felony domestic violence or felony child abuse charges, or there's different ways that prosecutors are going about it in different states. But the thought behind it, if we kind of paint it in the best light possible, is to say, well, we don't want children to be harmed, and so we're going to communicate that to their mothers by saying, don't use drugs or you might get arrested. And so they then will not use drugs while they're pregnant because they won't want to get arrested. Talk us through why that is not going to achieve the goal that maybe the people who are supporting it hope that it achieves, to actually keep people healthier.
I think when we think about approaches to trying to reduce or remove use altogether, we can look beyond the prenatal period to just, what have we tried? What have we seen? What have we learned? And I think it's hard with what we know today to still kind of be on board with the fear and punishment approach to a health problem. And again, that approach is based in a very binary type of idea that substance use is bad and not using substances is good. And we've already talked about complexity, and that carries through all of this, and it needs to carry through the approaches that we use to address substance use and prenatal substance use. So fear generally has not been a successful way of addressing use because, as we've named, there's really complex needs that are being met, reasons people use, and even for folks who have decided, like, look, the cost is too high for substance use. I don't want to use substances anymore. I want to stop completely. There's still not the sort of the tentacles of how woven into someone's life and being long-term problematic use is, just like you said, it cannot just be cut off. Like we have to address all of the whole picture. And I want to name the contexts that people are in as well, that it's not just that I'm a person who has, mental health challenges or some other things that trauma, whatever, that drive me to using substances to cope. But there's also all this systemic stuff too. There's poverty, there's racial inequities, there's lack of, like, our healthcare system is just really struggling to meet people's basic needs right now. There's housing. When we look at the totality of what people are sort of fighting through to take care of themselves, their babies, their families. Again, we can't isolate substance use in that mix, in those contexts. As bad as I had many, many different things going on, many different kinds of challenges. The fact that my husband was undocumented was just one of so many other things that were going on. And then we think about, for some people, it's much worse. The challenges or the inequities or the lack of access is looks presents even more challenges. So when we use a technique like we're going to incarcerate you if you don't stop using, it's like we have blinders on to the realities of folks' lives and our systems and our communities. The fabric of our communities just, it's not there the way that it used to be. And so these are individuals who are not necessarily being held up by community, by systems, by threads that are woven together. And so when we only have a single-minded kind of approach, it's bound not to work. And that goes for all of the different things that we try, like just medication for opioid use disorder is probably not going to fix all the other problems, but it's a really good tool because it moves in the direction of healing and health. The criminal justice approach moves in the other direction. My criminalization as a pregnant mom was profoundly destructive. It was traumatizing. It interrupted one of the most important protective factors we have, which is secure bonding and attachment. The impact that incarceration and surveillance had on me bonding with my daughter is profound and lifelong. It continues to this day. And there's no undoing that. Like we can't go back and fix that. And so approaches that separate moms from babies, parents, period, from babies, especially in infancy and early childhood, are always going to cause lifelong damage. And we know that. We have the research to prove it. So what are the approaches that we can put into action and use that support compassionate, holistic care that keeps moms and babies together and hopefully whole families together? Because that period in infancy and toddlerhood is so important to have a safe and consistent caregiver, and the best one there is the bio parent. And we do have to recognize that that's not always the best option. There are parents who are not able to be that best person, but to decide to not give them the chance, I think, is a huge injustice to the child. If we care about the long-term outcomes for children, we have to invest in the parent-child bond. And criminalization does the opposite of that.
That is so powerful. And I think, again, with that kind of flattening out of people's lives, we when I hear people talk about babies and substance use and moms and pregnancy and all of that, I tend to hear people only counting the cost of what might happen related to leaving a child with its mother who has been struggling with an addiction. And there is generally no one who is talking about, oh, but there's harm on the other side also when you interrupt bonding of a parent and child. That is a real provable, that, like, we know this is not disputed information, that the bonding period, especially in that first year of life, but throughout infancy and toddlerhood and all of that, is incredibly crucial to a child's well-being and to the way that they will view the world and themselves and people and relationships in general. We know this is true. And that was a new thing for me to learn about as a foster parent and as an adoptive parent, which I am now, of just, people used to, because the children that we fostered were all babies, we would have so many people say, well, they're too young, they won't remember anything. And I would always say, oh, no, that is actually not true at all. Babies, they have spent 9 months in the belly of a particular person whose voice they know, whose rhythms they know, whose they know. It doesn't matter if they have a cognitive memory of it or not. Their body knows. Their being knows when separation happens. And even if they don't have a memory of that, it knows every time there's a separation that happens. So if they get bounced around throughout their infancy and toddlerhood, that break in the bonding experience is affecting them every time. And so I think that is a perpetual problem, not just in the issue we're talking about today, but in everything related to substance use and criminal justice, is we tend to only talk about the potential for harm with one particular response, and we don't say, but wait, what's going to happen on the other side? Like, there's also harm that's going to happen there. Is there potential for harm one way? Yes, but there is definitely harm happening the other way. I read an article a couple of years ago about a state whose foster care system was particularly struggling, and they had done an investigation into it. And one of the quotes in the article was that, based on everything that had come out in this investigation, it could even be fair to say that the state was the abusive parent in the situation related to the children that were in their care, that it would have been better for children to be with their biological families, even with whatever was going on, than what they ended up experiencing through the mismanagement of their life and custody through the state. So I just think we don't put enough emphasis on, there is real cost to removal, there's real cost to incarceration, there's real cost to disrupting families and relationships, and especially in this really crucial period of infancy and early childhood, that is a big deal.
And there's another factor too, which is you're deterring pregnant people from getting health care. And, another really critical factor in the long-term outcomes of children is good prenatal health care, and also related to maternal death and infant death. And, prenatal care is like a no-brainer priority. And if parents know that they're very likely to be reported to child welfare or law enforcement for any level of substance use, they're not very likely to go to the doctor. And, so when there's sort of a threat, or, it's this idea of sort of a carceral element to healthcare, like when those two are tied together, the potential is really there for a lack of engagement, absolutely, but just real harm. And it puts healthcare providers in a really tough spot too. I would say most healthcare providers, even though there's very widespread stigma, and healthcare providers are no different in having negative bias towards people who use substances, especially, pregnant people who use substances. And at the same time, that most of them would prefer not to incarcerate parents. They don't want to make that phone call. they don't want to report. And, they can understand that, compassionate care is actually far more helpful than coercive or criminalized care. When just saying criminalized healthcare, it's like, how can we
The
put the
words don't
words
go
together,
together.
with it? You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
yeah, I think about had my daughter and my husband and I been offered a compassionate, loving, caring, supportive environment with comprehensive services that recognized that I had mental health challenges, that I had trauma, that, I had a partner who was using and couldn't access any services because of his lack of documentation, that, poverty was a fact. Like if I had been able to be connected to services through the prenatal setting, and supported in making positive changes, I'm not going to say today, 25 years later, that, oh, I would have absolutely like never used a substance again and it would have fixed everything and everybody would have been fine. I'm not sure that that's the case, but it would have allowed for a much greater chance of success and of that bonding happening. And, we can't know what will happen when if we change this, then we know this will happen. We don't know. Things are complex and there's so many different factors. But if we're starting from a place of separation, if we're starting from a place of criminalization, if we're starting from a place of telling parents that they're terrible parents before they even become a parent, and sort of reinforcing these messages that I can't do this, I'm a failure, I'm a bad mother, I'm a bad father, I'm a bad parent, I can't succeed, I shouldn't have this child. Like those were the kinds of messages that I was getting, both explicitly and implicitly. Am I expected to believe in my ability to parent, to be able to access that nurturing, loving, bonding place, to care for my daughter when I am in a place of fear and self-loathing and trauma? I mean, I felt really that from the moment the DEA knocked on my door, until like 15 years later, like I was in active trauma all throughout the pregnancy and my daughter's early years. And how is that? How is that helpful?
Yeah. Even just thinking as you're talking about the amount of stress on you. And we know that moms who are stressed out in their pregnancy, that their babies are experiencing that along with them because they're connected. And so if we've got moms in fear and terror and shame and self-loathing, all the things that is making that is negatively impacting their baby. So
That
I think,
trauma is baked into that baby. I mean, that's how I feel. It's like I baked that trauma into my child, and that's what she's dealing with today as a 24-year-old, is deeply struggling with the trauma that she experienced early in her life. Like it's the reckoning has come to her as an early adult, uh, profoundly impacting, and it will continue to impact her entire life. And it could have been different.
yeah. When you were talking earlier, I was thinking, when you were talking about just the fear that, uh, you know, it is encouraging women not to go to the doctor if they know that a visit to the doctor could get them an arrest or something like that. So I was just thinking about that part of the goal is being achieved by this approach of prosecuting women. It is making women afraid, but it's afraid of the wrong thing. It's making them afraid of healthcare. It's afraid of a visit to the doctor, afraid of anyone knowing that they're struggling, afraid of reaching out for any kind of help because of what could happen. Whether or not we think, well, no, that it's, we want it, or the intent is a particular thing. Intent and outcome are not the same thing. And we can't just sit on intent and say, well, we were hoping it did a good thing. Well, if it's not doing the thing for which it is intended, which is keeping moms and babies safer and healthier, then we need to stop doing it immediately, because that is not serving the moms, the babies, or the rest of society. It does not help the community at large when we have traumatized families and traumatized babies and families that are struggling to regain those kind of early years. I mean, I remember, when I was in the hospital with my giving birth to my first son, and I read all the books and, what all is good for them. And, I was telling the nurse, which I'm sure they get tired of first-time parents, but just telling the nurse, like, okay, don't take him out of the room, after he's born, like, leave him in here with me, give him a bath beside my bed so that we're still in the same room, so that, we're still connected and he's not gone. And, you think, okay, well, that's true, whether or not I'm a mom who wasn't using substances or struggling with addiction, or a mom who is, like, that same, our the way we are as people, and those same connections and that same bonding, all of those things are at play in every pregnancy and birth, not just someone who is not currently struggling with a substance use disorder and is, posting their little happy birth pictures all over Facebook or whatever. That's true for everyone. That opportunity to support bonding or to break that bonding process is true no matter what the family circumstance is. And I think often of Joanne, the mom who really changed my heart and life through when we fostered her son. And she was able to go to a treatment center that allowed moms and children to stay together. Dads also, actually, it could be a father or a mother, a child up to the age of 5. They had childcare on site for them while they went to classes. There's only 2 places like that in Mississippi. Very few treatment centers provide that sort of thing. And she still says to this day, almost 10 years later, part of what kept her on that sobriety journey, even after 20 years of using substances, and many of that problematically, was that every morning she got to wake up and her son was right there. And it was a reminder of why she was doing this hard work. And they got to stay together in a dorm-style rooms. She got to have his little bassinet next to her. And so that time where they were separated was far shorter than most people experience, even if the mom is doing everything they can to go through treatment or to get the help or whatever it is that they need. Most of our treatment approaches do not allow for moms and infants to stay together. And so even if the mom says, I need help, we're still immediately breaking that bond and saying, okay, go off for 90 days of treatment and then some sober living time. And that, here we've got a 1-year-old who hasn't been able to spend that time with their mother. And I just think about Joanne talking about those days and how important that was for her to be able to have that bonding, and to be working through that early sobriety with the pressures of parenting happening, so that it wasn't she was in treatment by herself and then suddenly she's back home in early recovery with a baby. And, it's like, wow, goodness gracious, that's a lot to navigate at one time. And so in this environment, she was able to be working on her recovery and learning how to parent and bonding and getting that support during that early time. And it breaks my heart that we have so few options like that for people.
Yeah, and I really think, when we think about this, we tend to focus on the child, the baby, the child, and the mother is kind of secondary and often just like an impediment, right? Considered like in the way or not doing the right things to support the baby. But if we really are invested in long-term outcomes for the children, then we should be investing in the diet. We're investing in the maternal health as well. the maternal mortality rate is insanely high, and the overdose rate in the postnatal period is extremely high. And so, if we're looking at, well, what are we doing just to protect the baby? It's kind of a protective stance, right, for the infant and the child, which puts, can be this opposing kind of thing where the mother is just potential damage, not protective, and we're protecting the child from the parent. And I think one of the things that we can get confused about is that parents who use substances don't care about the babies, that they don't care about their children, and that is the furthest thing from the truth. We have the same kinds of hopes and dreams and wishes and wants for our children, and love them just as deeply as every other parent does. We just often have challenges when we're talking about substance use that keep us from manifesting being the parent that we want to be. But we want to be that parent. Of course, you could come up with, oh, well, I know this one that did, but if we really believe in nature's and our, divine design that we want and love and should be with our children and protecting them and caring for them, then we have to support that parent's ability to carry that out. It is how we are built and how we are made. And when we sort of just decide that one particular thing, substance use, means that that parent is, unqualified or should not be part of the equation, then we're missing this incredible opportunity to actually support the most natural thing in the world. And if we invested in the parents in manifesting what is this beautiful natural thing that we're already feeling, I think we would see a huge difference in the long-term outcomes for that child, for the parents, and for any future children.
Love that. So that was going to be my question. Where should we go from here? So give us, what is your dream? You've done a lot of work on this. You just wrote an article that came out in Health Affairs. We'll link that in the show notes. Where should we go from here? What are the ways that we can better support moms and babies in that prenatal period, the postnatal period, all of that really crucial time in a child's life, in a mother's life, and everyone who is involved in this. And I'm so glad that you brought that up, kind of how we think about what's best for the child. And we disconnect that from the fact that what's best for the child is to have a bonding experience with their parent and to be closely connected and to have that supported and healthy. That's what's best for a child. If we can help that to happen. Yes, there are times where that just can't happen, but there's a whole lot of times right now where it's not happening because it's being proactively broken, not because it could not happen if there was just some support there. So where should we go from here?
Yeah, we just have to start with believing in parents, believing in the possibility and the potential and the, like in the beautiful nature of how we are built and made and what we want. The vast majority of parents want to be good parents. And so thinking about how do we invest in keeping them together, just like you said. And that begins by stepping back from these policies of reporting, reporting to child welfare or reporting to law enforcement and criminalizing parental substance use. That to me is the absolute sort of front line action that we can take today, is to look at what your state's laws are and to try to promote either, remove laws that criminalize or mandated reporting that doesn't have any subjectivity, right? So in some states, there's still states that you have to report medication for opioid use disorder to child welfare, right? So stepping back from those, getting rid of those kinds of policies that leave no room for looking at complexity and individuality and all of that.
And what
And
your
then,
doctor has prescribed for you in that situation. Your doctor has said, this is the health care that this woman needs during pregnancy, and that's getting reported to child welfare.
yes, name one other medication in which that's the case. There's no other group of medications other than what we consider, narcotics, right? That would be automatically reported like that. So, and even to name alcohol and fetal alcohol syndrome is, I don't want to compare and say, oh, one's worse than the other. But when you look at the impact of heavy alcohol use, it's devastating. Yet we do not automatically report the way that we do for opioids and even medications. So in the absence of, we're going to report, we're going to force, coerce, fear-based control, what does that leave us to do proactively? And that is to provide compassionate, holistic care. The alternative to that is doulas, peer support, peer doulas, comprehensive connections to multifaceted care. It means, looking at a pregnant person coming into a healthcare provider, a benefits office, a housing, any of our systems, and saying, show me the totality of your challenges. I'm not just going to look at this one piece of your life. I want to know what are the biggest things that are keeping you from providing a healthy host and keeping you well for the benefit of yourself and your child, and actually addressing those. I think when we really start to ask those questions in the prenatal period, we'll realize things like housing stability, access to healthy food, just resources, period, having transportation, being able to access healthcare, like those are the kinds of things that people actually need, getting mental health care, quality mental health and behavioral health care, access to treatment if that's what somebody needs. When we start to look at a whole picture, that we'll see that there are other factors that we can have an impact on. We can't solve all of those challenges. If we could, they would be solved. I would like to think anyways. Really looking at how can we support safety, nurturing, bonding, and compassionate access to the kinds of things that people need. Because again, we cannot, I would even say, stop looking at substance use as the primary factor in someone's ability to parent, and actually look at all of it. Look at every factor, and substance use is just one of those things.
Yeah. Love that. Lots of good things for us to think about. And I feel like this particular angle of the issue of substance use and addiction is such a great place for people who might have very different perspectives on a lot of other things to come together and say it benefits everyone for moms and babies to have better health outcomes during this really crucial time early in their life. It's going to set a course that it's not that you can't find healing from a course that has been set in a harmful way, but we know 100% we know what happens to children in pregnancy and early childhood does impact them for the rest of their life. And so we have an opportunity to set a positive, healthy course that is going to benefit the mom and the child and the rest of society, because all of those things that help to make a person healthy impact how they engage with the world around them and how they're able to show up and bring their best self to the world. And again, in so many ways, we only think about the impact one way. We don't say, as I was thinking, I'm always trying to think like devil's advocate. Something, I can hear somebody saying, well, I don't want to pay for more services for somebody, while they're pregnant. Like that's their deal, not my deal. And I would say, well, that you are certainly free to feel that way. But you will be paying for the services on the back end, because there's going to be a whole host of things that we know a person is at higher risk for if they have interrupted bonding and attachment issues and all sorts of things later in life. And so we can invest some on the front end, or we can invest a whole lot on the back end, with the domino effect of what happens for many people when that period is not healthy, and is interrupted. And so those, I respect where people fall on what they want their tax money spent on. I just want to highlight that just because you say, I don't want it spent on this, doesn't mean it's not being spent times 10x on the other side of that. What happens if you don't, do that?
Adverse childhood experiences are incredibly expensive. When we see the manifestation of ACEs in, young people as they grow up and mature, it's an incredibly costly enterprise. And that's who these parents are, right? These are parents who have grown up often with those kinds of same challenges that their child will come to have if the cycle continues. And so, like I said, the investment, like we can stop that cycle of just producing another generation of people who have early childhood trauma, insecure attachment, mental health challenges, poverty. Like those things are very clearly documented. Even just having multiple chronic health conditions, those clearly documented that those are very expensive things for society. And so I think you're absolutely right. We can invest now, or we can spend later. And I think it's just a no-brainer to do what we can in that earliest part of life, so we don't continue another wave of what we see of an epidemic of death.
Anything else you'd like to share with us, Meghann, before we wrap up?
I think just that we can't fix prenatal substance use. There's not going to be a solution that will just fix prenatal substance use. There will always be prenatal substance use. There will always be babies that are born dependent on one substance or another, or have impacts of prenatal substance use. What we can do is stop punishing people for health problems and start investing in what we know is one of the greatest protective factors, which is keeping families together.
Thank you so much for joining us, Meghann, for sharing your personal story, also your professional expertise in this area. Meghann is fantastic. We've worked with her on multiple things, as a storytelling coach, as all kinds of different things. She is incredibly gifted, has used the really painful experiences of her life in really healing ways for other people, helping other people on their own healing journeys. And I'm really thankful for you, Meghann, and for the work that you do. And so appreciate you being here.
It's my pleasure. I really, really respect and love the work that you all, that End It for Good is doing, and that you yourself are doing. So happy to be here.
Thanks. We will see you next time on the End It for Good podcast. I'd encourage you to go ahead and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you're not connected to us via email, go ahead and head over to enditforgood.com. Sign up for our email list. They come out every 2 weeks, and it is short and sweet and just keeps you updated on things we're doing, places we'll be speaking, or events we're hosting that you can be part of, and what's coming up next on the podcast. So we will see you over there. Join us on social media, and we are committed to a healthier approach to substance use so that everyone, children, parents, the rest of society, has the best opportunity to thrive. See you next time. So how do we shift our drug policies from a criminal justice approach to a public health approach? By inviting one person at a time to change their mind. Changed minds are the catalyst to changed laws. But many people are only willing to have this conversation when they're invited to by someone that they trust. That's you. Invite your friends, coworkers, other people in your circle of influence to consider a better way. At End It for Good, our hope is that people who hear will become people who tell. Start a conversation and join the movement to end it for good.